battered, broken, and barely anything left. Good evening, I'm Wendy Mesley, and this is The National. Irma leaves the Florida Keys in shambles.
For 15 years I've lived here, and one moment it's gone.
The shock there and the outrage here.
I feel deserted by my government because they sent the flight in after the hurricane, not before.
A kindergartner's death raises serious questions in Saskatoon.
This historic place has been obliterated, reduced to rubble.
Chris Brown is inside Aleppo, how it's rebuilding after years of war. Plus, Hillary Clinton opens up about losing.
I couldn't get the job done, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life.
We got our first glimpses of the destruction across the Florida Keys today, and we'll get to that in a moment. But we want to start tonight with a devastatingly sad story in this country. A little boy in Saskatoon, brand new to kindergarten, disappeared yesterday after his first recess. He was found a short time later, not far from the school, and rushed to hospital, but he died. And many are wondering if it was a death that could have been easily prevented. Bonnie Allen has the story.
A tense day for parents and a bit confusing for kids as everyone grappled to understand how a 5-year-old kindergarten student disappeared from Dundonald School during morning recess yesterday.
We have a 3-year-old boy ourselves, and it kind of hits close to home when you hear something like this, and especially when you got little ones yourself.
After a frantic search, the boy was found in this pond. He was declared dead in hospital. I'm standing on the edge of the school playground, and if you look over to the park, you can see the pond. It's only about 100 meters away. That's just over a football field. It takes about a minute to walk to the pond, and the boy's home is on the other side of the pond, another minute's walk. Today, the boy's mother was too distraught to speak.
Maybe he sneak out.
This daycare worker dropped him off at school. It was his first day. Iman Arslan says the boy was a newcomer from Somalia with limited English, and he had autism. When she left him at school, she understood he would have one-on-one supervision.
He was a special needs kid, and yeah, we never let him go without any staff.
As for questions about how many supervisors were watching children at recess or if recent budget cuts and layoffs were a factor,
I simply feel it's not the time to do anything but to emphasize that this is a tragedy.
At the school, people disagreed. They want to know why there isn't a fence around the schoolyard or the pond.
Because there should be like a fence around there, because like the pond is very dangerous. I mean, some people don't know how to swim.
This father worries about thin ice on the pond in the winter.
Probably just gets like some kind of fence, so something to cover it, so keeps the kids from going there,
People phone me saying fence the school, fence the pond, 4-foot, 12-foot fences, barbed wire on the fences, and I think at the end of the day, everyone's trying to just make a bad situation and just have some type of answer to this.
This kind of drainage pond in a public park or near a playground isn't uncommon. The city councillor for the area says the city will do whatever the coroner says is necessary to prevent future tragedies. Bonnie Allen, CBC News, Saskatoon.
It's been 2 days since Hurricane Irma hit Florida, but only now are we finally seeing the true extent of the devastation in the part of the state that took the worst hit. Today, search and rescue crews reached the Florida Keys, where they found widespread destruction. Almost every home there has been damaged or destroyed. There's no power, running water, or cell phone service. Highway 1, the only road through the archipelago, is severely damaged and blocking access to the lower Keys. But residents of the upper Keys were allowed to return today. Our Susan Ormiston was there as well.
Hurricane Irma made its first landfall here in the Florida Keys, and they've been cut off until today. This morning, police and authorities opened up the highway as far as here in Isla Mirada, that's just south of Key Largo. And this is what we found. This was a beachfront condo, 12 units. What you're looking at is the third story, which collapsed onto a second story and pancaked a ground floor car park underneath. Mike's parents own this vacation home.
This is just unbelievable. You'd never think this could happen.
As soon as the highway opened today, he was on the road with his dad, Tom Ross, in the car.
I've been here, going to the condo here for about 18 years, my wife and I.
And when did you come back to see it?
This morning. Oh, we just pulled up here and we just devastated. Couldn't believe what I was looking at. So, this is it.
He shows us where you can see a car wheel peeking out of the rubble. Mercifully, no one was in the condo, this area under strict evacuation orders. Mike and his daughters are picking through a new lagoon where some of their belongings are submerged. He thinks it was surging water that punched underneath the structure.
You'd put a boat here, a boat there, a boat there, boats all along. You can see the cleats, and there's, the sand was never here.
The sand was never here till this weekend?
Till I walked up today.
Wow, that's a lot of sand.
I think it dug out the bottom of the building and that was it.
There is nothing between here and the sea, and when it roiled up on Sunday, it aimed its fury on this narrow strip of islands. Trailer parks took a punishing blow. Rescue teams have already been in to search for residents. Power trucks and telecom workers stormed south today, as well as speeding convoy of Border Patrol and police, Army choppers, even essentials like porta potties. But access further south is still blocked. There is another 100 kilometers of devastation beyond this spot. As for the Ross family, they will never forget Irma.
I know what hurricanes can do. I didn't think it'd be this bad.
You still want to rebuild here?
Look over there. That's the Atlantic Ocean. I sit on my front porch every morning and have my coffee and look at the ocean. The only place you can do it. Yeah, right on this spot.
Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Isla Mirada, Florida.
The deaths of at least 13 people in the southern U.S. are being blamed on Irma, most of them in Florida. The entire state is still reeling from the storm, and it's not alone. Tom Perry has that tonight.
Irma's trail of destruction was wide and long, stretching across Florida to Georgia, South Carolina, and beyond. Its blistering winds ripping up trees and smashing homes. Its powerful storm surge sending water rushing into the streets of cities like Jacksonville and Daytona Beach.
There's a river. You could actually see it moving down the road and coming in the house everywhere. It's still in my backyard, probably a foot deep.
The storm knocked out power to 13 million people. Turning the lights back on could take weeks.
We got a lot of work to do, but everybody's going to come together. We're going to, get this state rebuilt. This state is a state of strong, resilient people.
Gas is still scarce, though in some places it is trickling in. For evacuees who fled the storm, a station with fuel is a chance to go home.
We're from Fort Myers and we got stranded here. We're having car trouble. We're having one heck of a storm. It's whooped our butt. We're frustrated.
The feeling for others is one of relief. People in Tampa were expecting Irma's full impact. Instead, it struck further south. Some who fled the storm have returned to find their homes safe and intact.
I feel relieved. I can breathe. I can breathe now, so it was very stressful.
Many others weren't as lucky, but amid the damage brought on by the storm, there are some signs of recovery. Some airports in Florida have reopened. One small indication this place is slowly getting back on its feet. Rebuilding after Irma will be an enormous task. It will take time and it will cost billions of dollars. With the storm now past, that work is just beginning. Tom Perry, CBC News, Tampa.
Irma's impact on Florida is bad, but it pales in comparison to the destruction in the Eastern Caribbean, where rebuilding could take years. Satellite images before and after the Category 5 hurricane show the island's lush landscape stripped of vegetation. On Barbuda, Antigua, and St. Martin, more than 90% of buildings were damaged or destroyed. Wide areas of the British Virgin Islands were also reduced to rubble. Cuba also suffered extensive damage. Across the region, at least 37 people were killed. Power is out and food is in critically short supply. Today, the United Nations said 200,000 people are in desperate need of help, but aid is starting to arrive, including from France, the Netherlands, and Britain. Canada is also sending help to the Caribbean. A military transport plane is flying supplies to the region, and it could be used to bring any remaining Canadian tourists back home. Ottawa says almost 700 Canadians have been flown back from the Caribbean since the hurricane hit. But many are complaining bitterly about being left stranded in the disaster zone without help or information for days. Catherine Cullen reports.
Travelers from the hurricane zone were relieved to be back in Canada, but for some there was another feeling too.
I feel deserted by my government because they sent the flight in after the hurricane, not before.
In fact, last night before they saw their friends and family, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister met returnees with a letter expressing that most Canadian of sentiments, "I'm sorry." It said in part, "I am very sorry for your ordeal. And if you would like to share anything about your experience or how we can better handle future disasters, please get in touch with us."
Pictures of the room.
Daryl and Debbie Sheppy likely have a few suggestions. They spent days waiting to get out of hurricane-ravaged St. Martin, only returning last night.
I had no one I could contact. The government had basically, I felt, forgotten about us or ignored us.
But is Chrystia Freeland actually apologizing for the actions of the Canadian government? It doesn't sound like it.
I think my words were that I was very sorry for their ordeal, which I am. I think that it was a very, very difficult experience for people.
Going into the Caribbean in hurricane season has risks attached to it.
This former ambassador to Cuba thinks these travelers should foot the bill.
The thought that the government of Canada is somehow miraculously going to teleport people back to Canada when they find themselves in these difficult circumstances, I don't think is realistic.
Global Affairs did try to warn people to get out in the days before Irma made landfall. But the Sheppys say by the time they got word, the airport was shut down.
You could have texted me and said, get out of town. Because they are claiming that, well, it was on our Twitter feed, that it was all there. I'm not a Twitter user.
Minister Freeland's office has indicated it has no intention of charging the travelers. It says the airlines behind those 3 rescue flights yesterday will absorb the costs. But WestJet told us that under circumstances like this, it's normal to work out a cost-sharing formula with the government later. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Ottawa.
It wasn't just tourists on those rescue flights. Many Canadians live and work or go to school in the Caribbean. And as Howard Gould tells us, now those lives are in limbo.
You would get out as soon as you could get out.
Yeah. Rosaline Murphy landed at her cousin's home in Canada last night. Today, she is still in shock.
That's your house?
Yeah. So
at the beginning of the month, she moved into this house she rented in the Turks and Caicos, getting ready to start a teaching job. Days later, the hurricane hit. She survived by hiding in a cabinet for 12 hours in what was a kitchen, clinging to a drain pipe as the roof blew off.
I peeked from where I was kind of hiding, and I could see it lifting, like right up, and I thought, oh my gosh.
She doesn't know when her school might reopen or how it will be possible for her to teach anytime soon.
And if I went back, I don't know if there are homes to rent anymore. Where would I stay?
Cantaloupe Hadier was a student on another island, studying at the American University of the Caribbean on St. Martin, working on his dream of becoming a doctor.
They have to rebuild everything, and I feel really bad about that. Because it was a beautiful island, and now it's like, it's in tatters.
Now he's back home with his parents in Canada and wondering where his classes might resume. It's possible, with the devastation, students and instructors will have to be shifted to somewhere else in the United States. He doesn't want to lose his semester, but
over time what I saw was that there's people that lost a lot more than I have the potential to lose. I don't really, complain or feel bad about it, because there's people that lost their entire lives probably in that hurricane. Locals, I can only imagine what's going through their head right now.
What's going through Rosaline Murphy's head is gratitude. She says she's glad to be alive, but also aware, like many Canadians, their plans to study or work in the Caribbean have been suddenly, violently disrupted.
I don't know. I don't know what's next.
Howard Gould, CBC News, Kitchener, Ontario.
Coming up, how Apple wants to change your reality. Plus,
I'm Margaret Evans in Berlin. Germany is a country that's been confronting its past head-on for decades now. But that doesn't mean it's always been easy. We'll have that story coming up later on The National.
an aggressive wildfire continues to burn out of control near the Waterton Lakes National Park in southern Alberta.
This is crazy. You can hear the fire roaring. We're being rained down on by ash.
Fierce winds caused the Kenau fire to double in size overnight, growing to 20,000 hectares. At least 450 people were given evacuation orders with no notice. The Hamilton judge who wore a Make America Great Again hat into court has been suspended for 30 days without pay. The Ontario Judicial Council says Justice Bern Zobel breached the standards of judicial conduct. At his hearing, Zobel said he just wanted to make people laugh. North Korea and the U.S. were both ramping up the nuclear rhetoric again today over the UN Security Council decision to hit Pyongyang with more economic sanctions. Donald Trump called that a very small step.
Those sanctions are nothing compared to what ultimately will have to happen.
Meanwhile, Pyongyang's UN envoy called the sanctions unlawful and delivered a warning.
The forthcoming measures by DPRK will make the U.S. suffer the greatest pain it's never experienced in its history.
The sanctions are aimed at starving North Korea of fuel and income for its nuclear program. North Korea and Syria will be high on the agenda when the UN General Assembly meets in New York next week. Today, though, Russia's defense minister was visiting Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in Damascus. On the same day, the Russian military offered CBC News and other foreign media a rare look around inside Syria. Chris Brown shares what they saw.
We are in the heart of Aleppo, Syria, right next to the beautiful old castle. Thousands of years it stood here. It's really been the focal point of this city and one of the great tourist attractions in Syria as well. And it's heartbreaking not just to look at the castle, but to look at the destruction that surrounds it here from 6 years of civil war. Everything is obviously obliterated, and it's hard to see, hard to ever imagine this place being restored to what it once was. And yet that is the message that we're here to share in today from Russia's military. A lot of foreign media, including a crew from CBC, our crew, was invited to come to Syria. We didn't know where they would bring us, but they brought us here to Aleppo, and they tried to show us some examples of progress that have happened since Russia has been involved in this conflict for the past 2 years. We visited schools and spoke to teachers about their hopes.
Aleppo is improving. People in Aleppo, now they are comfortable, more comfortable. You can go to the street and you are not afraid of something that is coming to kill you and your children.
Everyone we talked to today was clearly coached that they were coming. Their answers probably were even well rehearsed, and yet at the same time, many of them did seem very sincere. We were also taken to a Russian Air Force base where they were doing sorties, some 50 sorties a day. They're still flying against ISIS positions in the far east of Syria. We're told some 85% of this country is now out of ISIS control. It's the remaining 15% that the Russians say they are now targeting. Chris Brown, CBC News in Aleppo, Syria.
Straight ahead, the augmented reality tech that Apple is thrusting into the mainstream.
By the time it finally dissipated itself, Hurricane Hazel had streamed and hacked its way from Haiti to James Bay in a path of death and destruction 200 miles wide. Drownings, falling trees, crushed homes, and washed-out bridges accounted for more than 100 deaths, one-third of them in Ontario alone. So far, 30 bodies have been recovered in the Toronto area. Some of them are as yet unidentified. Complete casualty figures won't be available for several days, but latest reports indicate the final death count in Ontario may exceed 60. 24 hours after the hurricane and floods had passed, some 300 people were still missing. Countless thousands are homeless. Camera crews from CBC Television News worked through the night to bring you this exclusive eyewitness account of Hurricane Hazel. With rainfall reaching almost 7 inches in places, some rivers ran as much as 16 feet above their normal level. When dawn breaks, planes take to the air to survey damage. The sight that greets them resembles a lake, its surface deceivingly quiet. The damage doesn't show, but estimates say farmers will count their losses in the millions of dollars. Then the 4-lane bulwark that links Toronto to her western suburbs, the Humber Bridge. It's totally impassable. Toronto's prized traffic bottleneck, the Humber River Bridge, was washed out on its approaches, although the bridge still held. It was luckier than many other bridges in the greater Toronto area. More than a score of them have been washed away. Some of them have completely vanished. More than 40 highways and main roads are underwater. All traffic to and from Toronto was banned by provincial police, pending a survey of the actual damage.
It's been 10 years since Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone. And today, Apple unveiled its newest models with what its current CEO calls the biggest leap forward since that first device. The company is throwing a lot of money behind technology it sees as the future, augmented reality, or AR. Our tech reporter Matthew Braga was at the unveiling and joins us now. So Matt, tell us more. What is augmented reality or AR?
Yeah, so augmented reality is this layering of digital information onto the physical world, right? In this case, as viewed through the lens of your smartphone's camera. Now, it's actually been around for a long time, but, Apple has sort of come along and is trying to actually bring this technology mainstream. So today, they've got its new iPhone 8, its new iPhone X, or iPhone 10 as it's called, and both of these have, more powerful sensors, more powerful cameras, software, and things like that built into it. And they're betting that this is going to help take that augmented reality experience to the next level, right? It's actually going to make this palatable for sort of regular users. And so they offered a few examples on stage of, what that next level actually looks like, right? So there was a 3D game, sort of this powerful stargazing experience that kind of maps to the sky. And then this really interesting experience from Major League Baseball, right? That kind of puts information above players' heads while you're watching the game. They say it's totally going to change the way that you watch baseball.
So it all sounds very cool, but are there practical applications too? Not that that's not practical.
Yeah, so until now, a lot of these experiences have been games. They've been sort of experiences like the Snapchat, hot dog and then face filters and things. But developers have actually been spending the last few months trying to make this stuff a little bit more practical, trying to find those sort of useful examples, right? So, we've seen examples of a virtual tape measuring app, right, that, you can use to kind of measure objects. IKEA has been working to update its app so you can kind of see how furniture fits into your house before you actually go buy it. And you've got companies that are, working on creating sort of menus that sort of visualize what the food looks like on your table before you actually order it. And what's important to remember is a lot of analysts and industry watchers basically say that these are kind of just stepping stones, right, to the sort of things that Microsoft and Google are working on. These head-mounted displays, these goggles that'll actually be even more immersive, right? You'll be able to use your hands, you'll be able to kind of look through sort of this device that sits on your face, and it's really being pitched as sort of not just the future of fun but the future of work, right? So imagine instead of having to Google how to fix a drain, you've just got the instructions right there on front of your face. Now, that's way off in the future, but what we have for now is Apple looking at how to bring those experiences to, the hundreds of millions of devices that people already have in their pockets.
And all this for just $1,000 US. Sounds exciting, though. Thanks so much, Matt. Matthew Braga in California. It's Hillary Clinton's third memoir, but probably the one that will get the most attention. The one-time presidential candidate uses 500 pages to give her version of why she lost the election. Part catharsis, part blame layer. As Paul Hunter tells us, she also includes plenty of criticism of the man who beat her.
You may remember Hillary Clinton. Way back before Donald Trump won the White House, most of the world thought she was destined to be president. Of course, it didn't turn out that way. And her new book, says Clinton, is aimed at, as the title puts it, explaining what happened. Says Clinton, reading an excerpt.
I couldn't get the job done, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life.
The broad consensus is there are myriad reasons why she failed. Not least that Clinton was a flawed candidate with a weak message. In her book, out today, Clinton accepts responsibility, but still dishes on Bernie Sanders, the media, sexism, and absolutely on then FBI Director James Comey. Days before the vote, Comey publicly reopened an investigation into Clinton's private email server, ultimately finding little, but at the same time, staying largely silent on allegations Russia and the Trump campaign were in cahoots. If not for those decisions by Comey, she writes, everything would have been different. Coincidentally, there's now a report Russia used Facebook to stage phony political rallies last year, aimed at stoking anti-immigrant feelings and, in theory, aiding the Trump campaign. Then there's Trump himself. Clinton calls him hateful and a fraud. Listening to Trump, she writes, it almost felt like there was no such thing as truth anymore. And remember that debate where Trump loomed behind her on stage, coming, as it did, just 2 days after that bus video came out, where Trump was caught boasting about groping women? Writes Clinton,
he was literally breathing down my neck. My skin crawled.
Should she stay calm and carry on, she wondered, or
do you turn, look him in the eye, and say loudly and clearly, back up, you creep?
Donald Trump's not known for reading books, and today the White House wouldn't say whether he's likely to crack this one, noting that Trump is already well-versed in what happened election night, adding that Clinton's book is rife with false and reckless attacks. As the White House put it, sad. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
Coming up.
So it says the...
Alles fürs Vaterland, Adolf Hitler. Und da ist es halt
swastika.
Margaret Evans finds out how today's Germany handles its Nazi history. And later, a growing crisis. Why are hundreds of thousands of Myanmar's Muslims being persecuted? That's all ahead on The National. But first, a look at the business numbers. The TSX rose 103 points. The dollar dropped almost a quarter of a cent. The Dow hit a record high, gaining 61 points. The price of oil closed up 16 cents a barrel.
The National with Milton Nash.
Good evening and welcome to rainy Vancouver and Expo 86.
The province they call Supernatural is ready. They've been drilling, painting, cleaning, and checking all week.
I think everyone's relatively calm.
There's everything here, from the world's biggest flagpole to the world's biggest hockey stick and the world's biggest hockey puck. You never know what you'll see next, and you never know who you're going to meet next. There's the mascot of the fair, Expo Ernie.
Well, bless my little robotic heart. Noel Nash, a crew from the National. How do you do? Glad to have you here.
Expo is a fair about transportation, so this state-of-the-art monorail was a natural. For the first 2 months, it kept breaking down, but now it's carrying capacity crowds. The sun shone for the first time in weeks in Vancouver today, and with the sun, Expo 86 came alive. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people got to see the fair for the first time. Being Saturday, it was a big day for the children. And for children, what counts at a fair is the fun. There was no shortage of that.
Just great. It's bringing the whole country together, too.
$5,000 is spent every night by Expo for a computerized laser and fireworks show. It's called International Nights of Fire.
We've never seen fireworks like that before.
Oh, that was awesome. At 86th Street, they party with the Powder Blues Band, and they obey the rules to eat, drink, and go crazy. When they first opened, these nightclubs had so many customers, things sometimes got out of hand. So extra doormen were hired. Proper dress is now required. The people who don't like dress codes still have a place to go, though. At the Irish pub, there doesn't seem to be any code at all.
Expo has done itself proud. That's great. They did well. I enjoyed myself like no other time.
It's the best thing that ever happened to British Columbia and to me.
I love it. I've had a great time here.
When we said in the House of Commons that was the most ridiculous policy ever, then if you will just wait, the truth will be given to you.
To unfurl a flag that is truly distinctive and truly national in character, as Canadian as the maple leaf on your badge.
When the cavalcade rolled up to a stage where Trudeau was to make remarks in support of the local candidates, he was confronted by sign-carrying hecklers again, this time protesting high unemployment. Trudeau's response, as it has been throughout this campaign, was to fight back.
Yeah, we saw you last night with your painted and hired signs and your hired friends. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 of you holding signs like little boys. Come on, go and look for some jobs.
Oh, you're lost without your notes.
This lady just wouldn't give up and kept up a barrage of one-liners throughout the speech.
Are you running as a rhinoceros or as a liberal? Eh?
No rah-rah speeches. The truth.
Mulroney was frequently interrupted by a large and unusually provocative group of hecklers, most of them striking workers at the Gainers meatpacking plant in Edmonton. Mulroney appealed for calm, didn't get it, and didn't like it.
You can yell and you can scream all you want. I've fought bigger and better people than you, and I'll do it again.
As the Prime Minister continued toward his car, he came face to face with one of the demonstrators. Suddenly, Chrétien took the man by the back of the neck. His other hand was over the protester's mouth. He pushed him aside. Seconds later, another protester approached the Prime Minister. Chrétien knocked over the bullhorn that was in his hand.
But he was right in front of me, shouting and trying to block my way, so I took him out.
In Germany's capital, there are lifeless reminders of a time when so many lives were taken. The grey slabs of its Holocaust memorial do not downplay or hide that genocide. It's meant to be seen. And as both Canada and the United States grapple with controversial symbols in their own histories, they could look to Germany. How that country deals with the echoes of its dark past could prove a powerful lesson. Margaret Evans has our story.
The bells of St. Jacob's Church in a town called Herxheim am Berg, sounding the midday call. Nestled in hills dressed in the rich vineyards of Germany's southern wine region, the church dates back 10 centuries. In medieval times, people believed bells could vanquish demons. But some demons are bigger than others, and there is a secret in the clock tower. An 83-year-old bell bearing a swastika and the name of Adolf Hitler. The town's mayor, Ronald Becker, has just resigned over the controversy created by the bell's recent rediscovery, but he still agreed to take us up for a look.
So it says the...
Alles fürs Vaterland, Adolf Hitler. Und da ist es
And the swastika. Yeah.
Everything for the fatherland, it says, dated 1934, the year Hitler came to full power. Nazi symbols have been banned in Germany since 1949, with some exceptions for historical artifacts. But Becker says he sees no reason to remove it.
Die Glocke sollte eigentlich hängen bleiben und sollte weiter ihren Dienst tun.
The bell really should remain hanging there, he says, and should carry on doing its duty, because we have here an historic bell. Becker says that town councillors have known about it since at least 1951. There was publicity again in 2011, he says, with no outcry. The village next to Herxheim am Berg is home to a retired teacher and part-time organist named Sigrid Peters. She's the one who discovered that the bell exists and still rings. She calls it a disgrace. It bothered me, she says, that other people just like me would hear the sound of beautiful church bells and have no clue that there's a swastika on it. Peters wants the bell silenced, not destroyed. She believes remnants of the Nazi era must be kept as a warning to future generations, but only when presented in proper context. Peters has received anonymous threats since she wrote to the local newspaper about the bell. People angry with her for stirring up the past. Berlin. If ever there were a capital of memory, this is it. The city's Holocaust memorial, dedicated to the some 6 million European Jews murdered by the Nazis, sits right in the heart of the German capital, a vast sea of stone slabs, anonymous, dehumanizing. Commuters taking trains to or from work at Wittenbergplatz are reminded that it was the same station from which so many Jews and others deemed undesirable by the Nazis were deported.
They have not been denying. No, they have not been forgetting.
Analyst Josef Janning says constant self-examination has allowed Germany to evolve to its current state, the most powerful country in Europe, with a chancellor, Angela Merkel, seen as a moral leader on the world stage, and for many here as an antidote to the US President Donald Trump, who seemed to have a hard time condemning a neo-Nazi march in Charlottesville.
You will see that there is no way to escape the fact that this has been the center of the Nazi terror machine. It was done from this city. And this city will tell you in a number of ways it was here where it happened.
The recent debate over Confederate statues in the United States has drawn the gaze of many here to the German example. Few countries have confronted a dark past as profoundly or as doggedly. But that doesn't mean there haven't been differences of opinion over how best to do that. Hitler, How Could It Happen? Is an exhibition examining the rise of the Third Reich and set in an old concrete air raid shelter. Managing director Enno Lenze says any historical exploration of Hitler is sensitive in Germany, in part because of fears that historical sites or objects could become neo-Nazi shrines. Even though he runs a museum, Lenze says he can see no argument in favor of keeping the Herxheim bell at St. Jacob's Church.
If you ask them if you're a neo-Nazi, they say, no, it's not that I'm a neo-Nazi, but. And then some weird explanation will follow about tradition and I don't know whatever. But I think no Democrat and no anti-fascist will keep a bell saying Hail Hitler.
There are other ways Germans work to keep the lessons of history alive, the mantra of never again, of necessity a continuum, passed down from generation to generation. Every year, students from teacher Rainer Seefield's history class make a pilgrimage to this cemetery on the outskirts of Berlin. Here they clean the gravestones of more than 1,000 forced laborers from outside of Germany who died under the Nazi regime. For one so young, they are caring but heavy acts of atonement, especially for a history not of their own making. Wilhelmina Ellinger is 14.
I think I can't change anything about it, and I'm not proud of it. But I think how Germany just grew after it and rebuilt itself, I think that's pretty good, because it's like one of the most powerful countries in the world right now. And I think that's like a good sign that we learned.
So much so that many Germans finally feel far more comfortable waving the flag, although not in a nationalistic way, they'll hasten to add.
We didn't used to think about this country as being great. No? Not in the sense of being über alles, as the first verse of the traditional German national anthem goes, Deutschland, Deutschland über alles, but in the sense of being a good place to live.
Nor does it mean that Germans feel free to finally untether themselves from the past, especially in Germany's current political climate. Another ritual of remembrance on a Berlin street. Small crowds gathered outside of an apartment block watch as some of the paving stones in front of it are dug up. They're replaced with little brass blocks known as Stolperstein, stumbling blocks, memorials placed in front of the homes people either fled or were deported from during the Nazi years. This couple and their 5-year-old daughter made it to France before being sent to Auschwitz, where they were killed. There are now more than 30,000 of these little stones across the country, the brainchild of German artist Günter Demnig. He arrives in a kind of Indiana Jones-type flurry to tap the stones into place before disappearing again without a word, sometimes even before the ceremony. Asked about Herxheim and the Hitler Bell, Rabbi Walter Rothschild shrugs. He's more concerned about gains on the far right ahead of elections later this month.
There are more important things at the moment. There's a whole refugee crisis to the whole of Europe. There's a whole mess that's happening in the Middle East. There's the whole problems of the climate and starvation in Africa. I'm not going to get worked up about a bell in a church.
But the old relic in Herxheim has in fact been silenced in the end. The day after we visited, church elders took a decision they'd previously said was for the town council to make, and the bell will ring no more. It won't be enough to vanquish the demons that haunt Germany, but as some memories fade, others are restored. Margaret Evans, CBC News, Berlin.
When we come back, she won the Nobel Peace Prize and is now being blamed for Muslim persecution in her country.
Most of the teenagers that we talked to last spring were very scathing about the kind of sex education that they got, both from their parents at home and at school.
I think they try to keep us naive as long as possible. At 12 and 13, I think we're ready to learn about the actual physical thing of sex.
Most people, by the time they get to grade 11 or 12, have gone out before anyhow.
Teenagers are getting their sex education from each other, and it is freely available to them on the newsstands. I feel I can give my kids the values they need when sex is the issue, but I cannot begin to give them the facts they need. That can only come from trained specialists using a curriculum as carefully planned as the maths course.
The dilemma facing young people today, sexuality. More adolescents are sexually active. By 16, most kids have had their first sexual experience, yet many of them are not sexually responsible. 85% of teenagers don't use any form of contraception.
During intercourse, the sperm are deposited inside the female.
A lot of people think the course is going to encourage sex, but it doesn't. If it does anything, it turns you right off.
The whole idea of birth control is to prevent fertilization.
They're being taught without the same morals that I would want my children to be taught under.
How do you feel you would perform in bed with two females?
Well, I personally think I'm pretty good.
Do you think you could?
Her name is Sue Johansson, and for the last year and a half, she spent her Sunday evenings answering questions, every imaginable question about sex.
I want to know how it'd have to be to have an abortion.
I picked up this prostitute, and I noticed that I have these cold sores on the inside of my lips.
They tell her things they'd never tell another living soul. She says the reason is simple.
Because they're desperate. They can't find anybody else that they can really open up to, who will trust, who will not put them down.
If you would give it to them straight, I think you'd have a lot less trouble with people going wrong afterwards, not really knowing what is happening.
Angry protests in India today, an urgent request for a UN Security Council meeting tomorrow. The sudden refugee crisis in Bangladesh has people around the world demanding action. Hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims have entered the country to escape a widespread military crackdown in Myanmar. Cameron McIntosh has the latest.
With each day, it gets more dire and more desperate. More than 370,000 Rohingya Muslim refugees have now fled Myanmar, appealing to the world for help. Scenes that have Rohingyas in Canada like Mohammed Tayyab feeling helpless.
I can do nothing, but whatever I can, my all of savings I send to them for my family.
Rohingya Muslims have long been oppressed in Buddhist-ruled Myanmar, also known as Burma. 2 weeks ago, Rohingya militants attacked a police post, prompting a military crackdown on civilians. Entire villages have burned. Now, each day, thousands of civilians are showing up on the Bangladeshi border, many like this man saying they were attacked. 1/3 of the people in my village, they killed them and threw them in the river, he says. The Myanmar government says it's fighting terrorists, today angrily denying accusations at the UN of genocide and ethnic cleansing.
Democratic Myanmar shall never tolerate such atrocities. I would like to place on record Myanmar's strong objection to the use of such terms.
Either way, UN officials say what's shaping up will soon be a refugee crisis of unprecedented proportions.
What is the crime of the children or women or the innocent people?
Visiting a border refugee camp, Bangladesh's prime minister condemned both the militants and the Myanmar government, demanding refugees be allowed a safe return.
How they can deny that they are not their citizens?
A question being asked of Myanmar's civilian leader, Aung San Suu Kyi. An honorary Canadian, she doesn't actually control Myanmar's military, but Canada is encouraging her to use her influence to ensure the safety of all civilians. Meanwhile, the borders to Myanmar are closed. Islamic Relief Canada is trying to get in to verify reports of violence for themselves.
There's just so many stories, and it's just when you hear them, you can't think, realistically that it's happening.
From the video friends and family have sent, Mohammed Tayyab is certain the situation is dire.
Canada have to stand up and put the pressure on the Myanmar government.
Meanwhile, those refugees just keep coming. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
So we just saw individual Canadians trying to help with the situation in Myanmar and Bangladesh. Does Canada, as a country, have any responsibility here? Fareed Khan is a volunteer with the National Council of Canadian Muslims. Andrew Bennett is a former Canadian ambassador for religious freedom. They're both in Ottawa tonight. So Fareed, I'll come to you in a moment, but Andrew, I just wanted to get your reaction. You've been to Myanmar, you established a couple of programs there to try and help with religious minority issues. What is your reaction to what's happening?
Well, I think just the tragedy of this humanitarian crisis is something that we all need to be very concerned about. We're seeing upwards of 200,000 Rakhine Muslims, Rohingya Muslims moving over into Bangladesh. And what we think is really concerning is that the government of Myanmar has shown a lack of genuine interest in trying to resolve this situation. The humanitarian crisis, Wendy, is one aspect of it, but this is something that could have been predicted, I think, many years back. There is endemic persecution of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. There have been lots of signals for the last number of years that this type of thing could happen. And I think we need to be very concerned that Aung San Suu Kyi and the government of Myanmar have shown a relative lack of interest in trying to address this situation forthrightly.
So, Fareed, Aung San Suu Kyi, she's a Nobel Prize winner. She's one of 6 people given an extraordinary honor by Canada of being an honorary citizen. You've put forward a petition to try and have that status revoked. Why?
Why? Because I'm a human being. I'm a human being who refuses to sit silent and not do something when there's such a tragedy occurring. And especially as a Canadian, because Canada has a direct connection to Aung San Suu Kyi. We gave her that honorary Canadian citizenship. And when we gave that honor to her, in a speech in the House, I can't recall if it was the Prime Minister or the Foreign Minister at the time, said that she embodied the qualities of freedom, democracy, respect for human rights, and the rule of law. And I think what's going on in the ground, in Myanmar demonstrate that that's no longer the case. And I think that to continue to have her hold that honor in the company of people like Nelson Mandela, the Dalai Lama, and Malala Yousafzai, our most recent honoree with a Canadian citizenship, I think that it diminishes all of their awards. And as a Canadian, I can't sit by and let that stand. And I think the more than 13,000 Canadians who've signed my petition, as well as other petitions on various other platforms, which adds to up to tens of thousands more, I think those Canadians think that the Canadian government should be taking action on this, not just symbolic action, but forceful action that saves lives on the ground.
Andrew, what do you think? Is that the solution or part of the solution here, revoking the citizenship?
Well, I mean, I would applaud the grassroots initiative that Fareed has launched, but I would agree with his second point in particular, that I think the Canadian government needs to really take a stand on what is happening in Myanmar. And it's interesting that citizenship has become sort of the issue, because in Myanmar, Rohingya Muslims don't even have full Myanmari citizenship. And this is outrageous when you think about it. We've got in Myanmar a state that is not unlike Canada in that it's multi-ethnic, it's multi-faith. And so I think the Canadian example of a multi-faith, multicultural country is one that Myanmar, in this moment in their history, where Aung San Suu Kyi and the people around her are trying to develop a genuinely, I would hope, democratic country.
Well, yeah, I mean, she is supposedly a beacon of freedom and democracy. How do you explain her position, which so far has been to not acknowledge the violence against them and to suggest that they're terrorists?
Well, I mean, there certainly have been some extremist attacks. We can't sort of put that aside. But this is, as I said before, is something that's been going on for a long time. And the fact that Aung San Suu Kyi has been silent on this speaks to, I think, the power of a particular ethnic Bamar nationalism that exists in Myanmar. The majority of Myanmar citizens are Buddhist. They're part of the Bamar ethnic majority. And there is a particularly sort of Buddhist ethnic nationalism that exists in Myanmar that has a rather closed view to other minorities within the country, whether they be Rohingya Muslims, whether they be Chin or Kachin Christians. So this is a concern if you want to build a genuinely pluralist country. So
Fareed, you say you've got 13,000 people who have signed the petition. The Prime Minister has expressed concern about what's happening. He hasn't commented or not on the idea of revoking citizenship. What do you plan to do with that petition?
Well, I'm hoping it's continued to grow, And there are grassroots efforts going on in not only in Ottawa, but across the country to express to the Prime Minister and the government the feelings that Canadians have that Canada needs to take a very strong stand, not just through our own actions here, but also in the international community.
Have you presented the petition to the government?
Not yet. I'm still waiting. Parliament hasn't resumed yet, and I'm hoping that within the next week or two, we will be able to do an event of some sort where we can actually present the petition through either someone from the PM's office or through an MP in the House of Commons. And I think that the Prime Minister can't ignore the voices of thousands of Canadians, not just the ones who've signed my petition, but the tens of thousands of Canadians who've signed other petitions on other platforms who are calling on the Canadian government to take action on this, not just symbolically, but in a very concrete fashion through our own means, as well as by working with international partners to make sure that the Rohingya are safe and protected.
Well, we'll be watching. Thank you so much, Fareed, and to Andrew, and see what happens with that petition. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There's still more ahead on The National. Stay with us.
I'm Anna Maria Tremonti. Tomorrow on The Current, during the U.S. presidential race, reporter Katie Tur was ridiculed by Donald Trump, taunted as Little Katie, a third-rate reporter. Katie Tur joins me on The Current, weekdays at 8:30 on CBC Radio 1.
I am sure you agree that we should talk frankly to each other. Frankness, in good spirit, is a measure of friendship.
The issues and irritants that inevitably affect all neighbors are small indeed in comparison with the issues that we face together.
Our friendship is deep and our understanding is great, but we have many problems, of course.
But a day which also saw what looked like the beginning of a fundamental friendship between Mr. Trudeau and President Nixon.
This is a new era of consultation and, we hope, cooperation.
Some American officials seemed appalled as Canadian security allowed demonstrators within yards of the first meeting between Prime Minister Trudeau and the President.
Canadians expect much of Americans, but more important, Canadians have faith in the Americans.
The Prime Minister was here to tell President Reagan what he was telling Canadian voters for the past few months, that he wants to restore not just good relations, but what he calls super relations between Canada and the U.S.
From President Clinton, there was no limit to the praise and the admiration he expressed for Prime Minister Chrétien.
Under your wise leadership, Mr. Prime Minister, relations between the United States and Canada have never been closer or more constructive.
He's a good guy, and I enjoyed to be with him.
4 years, 3 weeks, and 2 days since first being elected U.S. President, and George Bush said hello to Canada.
I frankly felt like the reception we received on the way in from the airport was very warm and hospitable, and I want to thank the Canadian people who came out to wave with all 5 fingers for
The purpose of the trip was that Stephen Harper and Barack Obama have some time to get to know each other and discuss whether they shared an agenda and some objectives.
I came to Canada on my first trip as president to underscore the closeness and importance of the relationship between our two nations. We see ourselves in each other. We're guided by the same values.
And like all great, enduring friendships, at our best, we bring out the best in one another.
CBC Original Series, now streaming at cbc.ca/watch.
I used to bike all the time back home. There goes the town bike, they'd say. Not in that way. The bike was actually shared by everyone in the town. And boy, did I get around. Again, not in that way.
Just before we go, here's a quick look back at a couple of our top stories. Near complete destruction in the Florida Keys, state officials say nearly every home was affected by Hurricane Irma, and it will take perhaps years to rebuild on the Caribbean islands that took direct hits. Nearly 700 Canadians were rescued from the storm. The Foreign Affairs Minister says she is sorry for what they went through.
I think that it was a very, very difficult experience for people. And I'm just glad that we were able to bring them home, and we are working hard to bring the remaining Canadians home.
And that's The National for this Tuesday night. For news at any hour, you can always go to cbcnews.ca. I'm Wendy Mesley. Thanks for watching.